Welcome to the DWI Guy podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the DWI Guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 92 of the DWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, we have my good friend and somebody that I greatly respect, Al Messer, joining us on the podcast. Al Messer has been a mentor to me since I started practicing law in Buncombe County. Since the first day pretty much that I was licensed, within just a few weeks, I was reaching out to Al with some questions. Mentor is defined in noun form as an experienced and trusted advisor. Very much would consider Al to meet that definition, but more importantly, as a verb, is defined as or is to advise or train someone, especially a younger colleague. Al has always been that to me. I think it was about 3 months out of law school that I sent Al an email. 3 months of being licensed, I sent Al an email asking him what references that I could look to in North Carolina as criminal reference books. And so he told me to get a copy of the NC Crimes book, like almost immediately responded, told me to get a copy of the NC Crimes book and told me to get a copy of Farb's Arrest, Search, and Investigation, I believe is the title of it. But basically the North Carolina Criminal Procedure Manual that Robert Farb has put out. And again, just immediately responded. Every time that I've had a question to bounce off of Al, he's always been extremely helpful and has really been, to me, one of the great examples of why it is so important for all of us to help one another, to help each other, to help a young attorney that is on their first case, their first day in the courtroom, helping a colleague with the same experience, or maybe sometimes even more experience, just always being that person that can act as a help point to each other. We are brothers in this, brothers and sisters in this profession. And it is because of people like Al that I have seen the value of having an amazing mentor. So he has really meant a lot to me in terms of developing my own practice, somebody that I've greatly respected and watched try many a case with great success, always an incredible trial lawyer. Al was born and raised in Western North Carolina. He was admitted to the bar in 1997. So he is celebrating this year in 2022, 25 years of practicing law. Right out of law school, he was handling a few cases working with another firm in Waynesville, where I also am from. So we kind of have that joint backdrop of both being from Western North Carolina and growing up in the Waynesville area. But Al worked with another firm for a little bit out of law school, became an assistant district attorney in Buncombe County. And then in 1999, he opened his own practice and started handling primarily criminal cases. Al has an immense amount of trial experience, both at the district court and at the superior court level, has tried to verdict multiple murder cases, but has also, and in my interaction with Al, has mostly been kind of going back and forth on DWI cases, mostly with him providing the information and me being the one requesting the information. But Al has always been a great example to me of somebody that really is passionate about trying cases and lives for being in front of a jury. Very excited to have Al on the podcast and hope that you guys enjoy the conversation that we had. So yeah, Al, tell us just a little bit about what it was that led somebody that now has all of these years of trials and experience in the rear view mirror. What was it that kind of sparked the interest of going into law school in the first place?
Yeah, I think quite honestly, I think the interest became being fearful of graduating from undergrad and not wanting to go out into the real world.
That's funny that you say that, because I'm in the same boat. So I'm actually interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was a criminal justice major. I was probably my junior or senior, senior year at the University of South Carolina, and I was like, I don't know if I want to go out and get a job as a law enforcement officer or whatever, and get a real job. So one of my professors mentioned something about law school, and I never really thought about it before, but you can go to school for a little longer and student for longer, won't have to go in the real world. And so that's sort of how it started. And then my dad was friends with an attorney from my hometown in Waynesville. His name was Reed Brown. And, I started doing some stuff with Reed, like in the summers and stuff. And Reed did a lot of sort of a general practice, but did a lot of criminal defense. And so I got to watch a lot of trials that he did. And I really became interested in the criminal defense aspect. Not so much, family law or civil law, but really like the trial work aspect of it. And, the more high profile kind of cases. And he also did a lot of DWI cases as well. So that sort of sparked my interest with going into, if I went to law school, going into sort of criminal defense, thinking I wanted to be a defense lawyer and especially a college attorney. And so through law school, and he sort of took the pressure off of me during law school, because he offered me a job once I got out. So everybody in law school was worried about getting a job. And I went to the University of Arkansas for law school. And, I always thought, hey, I'm going to go back and take the North Carolina bar and work for him, so I don't have a lot of pressure to find a job. And so I sort of just, I took law school serious, but
yes,
I wasn't the top scholar by any means. But just sort of focused, did a lot of took a lot of criminal classes, those kind of things. I worked for an attorney out in near Arkansas that did a lot of criminal practice while I was there for some. Did a third, like sort of like a third year practice where you could work with the DA's office. Did that some too in law school, and then took the bar and surprised myself, passed it the first time, and then got a job with the attorney in Waynesville, and so worked for him for about 8 months. And one day he told me to go over to Asheville, and you need to handle this case. It was like a drug case or something. He says, you need to find the head prosecutor. His name is Ron Moore, and you need to talk to him and see if you can work something out on this drug case. And like, okay, I'm fresh out of law school, really. Didn't know who Ron Moore was.
Ron was just waiting to see you.
Yeah, didn't know Ron Moore, as you know, was the district attorney, and I guess at that time was the district attorney for about 10 years or so, and he has his own reputation. But so I go over to the Buncombe County courthouse, never been there a day in my life, walk in, and this big courthouse, and all these people were in Superior Court. And I just, say, who's Ron Moore? And they go up and start talking to him. And, we talk a little bit, and I go and sit down and wait my turn. And before I know it, Ron's chief assistant comes out. Her name is Kate Dreer. And she grabs me and says, come to the back. I want to talk to you. And so I assumed they're going to talk to me about my case. And so I go back there, and she starts talking to me about everything except for the case. And 30 minutes into it, some of the other prosecutors come in, introduce themselves to me. And so I'm thinking to myself, about 30 minutes, I think I'm being interviewed for a job. And sure enough, Ron comes in, he talks. And before I leave that day, he offers me a job.
Wow, that is wild.
And I wasn't looking for it. I go back and I talk to Reed. I even joke about it, like, you'll never believe what happened. He offered me a job, and I just sort of blow it off. I'm not thinking about being a prosecutor at the time. And so, but Reed really says that's a great way to get some experience. Do a lot of trial work. And so eventually I accepted that position and was a prosecutor for a couple of years, and then ended up going out on my own in private practice in the early, like around 2000, and just threw myself into it. and was lucky enough to have a lot of people help me out. I got an attorney. His name is Jim Siemens. Let me have a little office space where he was renting an office. Had a lot of older attorneys that helped me through. Sort of mentored me, and sort of found my niche. Got lucky on some sort of high-profile local cases, some homicide cases, and decided to get certified as a specialist in state and federal criminal law, and do a lot of trial work. And I enjoy it. I really do. I'm not the smartest person in the world, so sometimes reading statutes and stuff like that can still be challenging to me. But I really enjoy the trial work and getting in front of a jury. And it's sort of ironic that I'm a criminal defense lawyer, because I was extremely shy growing up. I mean, super. And public speaking just terrified me. And even at this, sometimes today, I still get nervous. But, just like you, we have to get up and talk in front of sometimes hundreds of people. And especially when it comes to doing a trial in front of a jury, I guess something just clicks, and I just get in that zone and defend my client zealously, and sometimes I have to stop, and especially if I'm cross-examining somebody and it gets really serious, and you get a harsh tone. Happened in a case yesterday, and I was really getting after the guy, and I just think like, wow, you're really doing this? I enjoy it for the most part. DWI work also is extremely challenging, because the joke, as is sometimes it's easier to win a murder case than it is a DWI case, just the way the law is structured. But anyway, that's a long.
No, I appreciate that, and it's funny. It's funny to hear you talk about that, because for me, it was very much the same thing of, I didn't go into college thinking, okay, I'm going to be an attorney. This was the certain route that was going to happen. A lot of people that I talked to they've got, family members, parents that were attorneys. And so they kind of grew up in that house, or, read some book or had some life experience where it's like, I need to go fight for justice in the courtroom. And for me, it was just, okay, I graduated with a degree in philosophy. I better find something that can pay, because life on a rock, thinking about the world's problems is a tough sell.
Yeah. Well, when I was in college, in the early 90s, I watched a movie called Backdraft. It was about firefighters, and what was it? I think Chicago or something. And I love that movie, and I was like, I want to be a firefighter. That's what I'm going to do. And actually, my sister lived in Texas at the time, and I went out to Dallas, and I took the civil service exam, and I wanted to be a firefighter. And I never heard back from them for the longest time, and so I just applied to law school. And the week I was getting ready to go out to law school for my first year, I got a letter back from the Dallas Fire Department saying, "Congratulations, we're ready to move you on to the second phase." But I was at that point, I decided to go to law school, so I gave up that potential career in firefighting. But
I'm glad that you did. We would not have the great mentor and colleague that we have in Buncombe County if you'd gone that route. So I'm glad that you did. But I guess in terms of that transition from the DA's office to criminal defense, what kind of sparked that? What was the basis for that move?
When I was working for the attorney, in law school, and even after that, I always knew I wanted to be a defense lawyer, and so I never really thought of being a prosecutor. But I really enjoyed being a prosecutor. But after a couple of years, made the decision. That decided to go out and just try it. I think it was where my passion really was, and went out. And some other circumstances just led me into that. So didn't have a lot of preparation, but decided to do it. And it was scary going out, going on into private practice. But I had a couple people that sent me some cases, and started working the cases. Did some court-appointed work. At that time, the rules for taking court-appointed cases were much different. than they are now. I think, gosh, my first year out, I was appointed like a second chair in a capital murder case, which, these days that would never
happen. Yeah.
With the rules. But back then they didn't have the capital defender and all that. So, it wasn't really a big planned effort. It just sort of fell into my lap going into private practice. But I knew going into private practice that I wanted to do defense work. And I tried to do a little family law, and just me personally, I think I'd rather try a murder case all day long than getting involved in a divorce case or a custody case. That's I'm not cut out for that, really. And sometimes we do domestic violence, which we have to deal with some property issues. So sometimes we still have to do quasi family law, but I really enjoy just full-time criminal practice, and that's why I got specialized in the area and still do a lot of trial work. And again, just had some success and had a lot of people refer me things and different cases, and then fell into also. So I do a lot of DWI defense and homicides. Handle a lot of those cases too.
Yeah, I guess in terms of that full breadth of kind of criminal defense, because you do everything from a speeding ticket all the way up to murder cases. How do you think that, especially the felony experience that you have, how does that play into kind of the DWI defense side of things, of whether it's kind of having gotten used to taking cases to trial, or has that helped in any way? What has that done for you, kind of having that like full gambit of criminal cases?
Yeah, I think you learn you have so many different varieties of cases, from like you said, speeding tickets to DWIs to embezzlement, whether it's white collar crime or homicide. You have to, I guess it all just helps because I have to look at different aspects of the case. I have to read different statutes. I have to sort of analyze everything and think outside the box. And so do a lot of felony work and cases like that, I think helps me just sort of analyze things from all different angles.
Yes.
And that way, when I get into a DWI case, I sort of use that. I look, so the person's charged with the DWI. Well, okay, we start there. We look at the paperwork, and I look at all possible defenses. And sometimes, it can be difficult. And a lot of times, when I talk to clients, I'm like, look, this can be a case where we fight it, or we do what I consider damage control. And that is, minimize punishments and consequences. But just based on the experience that we've gathered, that's why we look at all aspects of it. I'm clear with the client from the get-go about what we'll do, but I'm going to be honest with you about what I think is going to happen. Ultimately, you have the final say-so. But we just take our experience and look at everything and see if we have a good, viable defense. And I tell people this, whether it's a DWI case or any kind of case, there's always a defense.
Yes.
Every single case, there's always a defense. Doesn't mean it's a good defense. Doesn't mean you're going to be successful. But there's always a defense.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is the spirit of a true trial lawyer. So I love that. I think in terms of that kind of offering of perspective of the full kind of gambit of cases, I feel like for a lot of prosecutors, it would be helpful if early on prosecutors could get involved in kind of some more serious cases, not necessarily being the first chair on those, but getting to see, a robbery or a rape or a murder case early on in their career, because I think that just gives you perspective for what you're doing in district court. And I think that the same in a lot of ways is true for the criminal defense side of things, where if you just don't have a good perspective of what it is that is kind of your client is facing, the consequences, and kind of, what difference between misdemeanor and felony and the punishments that are present, I think it just gives you a lack of perspective. So I feel like, it's so amazing to me when I talk with lawyers that were either a prosecutor early on or a defense lawyer early on that got to handle, a very serious A, B1, B2 felony, because of the fact that it just gives you a breadth of perspective in terms of that, consultation and how you kind of explore the possible defenses. How does that come out? What does that look like in terms of your, question and answer? How do you kind of pull those defenses out of your client?
Yeah. So typically in the age of COVID, it's sort of changed a little bit. So I have a ton of phone appointments these days.
Okay.
Really started with COVID. Used to, the person would come in the office and we'd talk for a while and just go through everything and ask them questions. So I still do that, but I do a lot of it on the phone. And so a lot of people these days are just more comfortable with having phone appointments and hiring over the phone versus in person. Still, we still meet people in person when they really want to. But so if someone calls, I talk to them about a DWI. Generally what I do is say, I want to just ask you a few questions, just me and you talking and just sort of get a little background of what's going on. Get them a little comfortable talking to me. And at that point, talk about confidentiality and what you tell me, I'm not going to repeat. But then I just say, I want us to go through some things and I ask about their background. And I ask, about, do they have a license and have they ever been in trouble before? And then, especially have you ever been convicted of DWI or been charged, in this state or another state? And some clients, I don't think they intentionally try to mislead you, but sometimes you have to say, have you been convicted of anything or have you ever been charged with anything ever? And sometimes you have to ask that question a million times because they may think, well, not in North Carolina or not in this state or not since I've turned, 18. So I ask background. And then as far as DWI goes specifically, I ask questions about, was there a wreck? Did you have a kidney? Do you know what you blew? And if there was a wreck, do you know if somebody was seriously hurt? Those are just sort of the basic questions because what I do there is just quickly try to establish, hey, am I looking at a case where I'm going to have grossly aggravating factors?
Yes. Yep.
And if I am going to have a case where I have grossly aggravating factors, how many am I going to have? Am I looking at one? Am I looking at two with a possible level one? Am I looking at three with a possible now, these days, A1? And so I want to establish that relatively quick. And then we go back into more depth about, what happened and not just grossly aggravating factors, but also, aggravating factors. And then, of course, the mitigating factors. So that's why I just sort of start out there and get an overall picture relatively quick about what generally I'm looking at. And then we get into more detail. And later down the road, of course, we can get into great detail. There's a lot of DWI questionnaires that are online. And I've looked at those before. And some of those are extremely extensive and, pages and pages and pages. And so sometimes we can utilize a lot of that information. But I don't really start out every conversation with that. If I feel like, hey, this is likely going to be to trial or go to trial, then we get a lot more in depth. And even if it's not going to go to trial, we still try to make sure we cover everything. But that's where I generally start so I can get an idea, hey, what am I looking at? As far as if this goes south for this person, if there's a plea, if this person was convicted, well, what are they looking at the very, sort of off the top? And that way, I talk to them, about defenses eventually, if they're, or damage control, and then what consequences are. Now these days with DWIs in North Carolina, there's 6 levels of misdemeanor DWIs. We talk about that. And that's why after I ask them those general questions, then I explain, hey, this is why I'm asking you this, because I'm trying to establish if you had a kid in your car, that's a bad fact. If you had, a wreck and somebody got hurt, that's a bad fact. If you're driving on a revoked license with a prior DWI, that's a bad one. Of course, prior conviction. So that's sort of where I start with stuff.
Yeah, I think that is a real benefit of having all of the trial experience because, I was talking with James Davis on the last podcast about his kind of process for doing cross-examination. And he was basically kind of shying away from using a scripted cross-examination because you want to kind of be able to take the officer wherever kind of the facts are unveiling themselves. And I think the same is in a lot of ways true in the consultation. If you have a good idea about where the legal issues are, instead of just having, obviously there are certain questions that you have to ask every single consultation, but sometimes you do want to just recognize, okay, here's the rabbit hole that we want to go down, because that's where our issue is going to be, and get way off of like any type of scripted consultation notes. So I think that's really important to have. And again, I think that's the value of having this trial lawyer's mindset is, I'm not just looking for sentencing factors in and of themselves. That's going to help kind of determine what we're facing. But then as we kind of get into the facts of the case, I recognize, because of, in your case, 25 years of experience doing this, I recognize, here's where our legal issues are going to be on a DWI. And so we're going to get zeroed in when it sounds like there's something a little bit unusual. So, again, I think there are some benefits to the DWI questionnaire. And I would say particularly for young lawyers, if you don't have a good kind of go by in terms of the types of questions you should be asking, they're online. Ask somebody in your local bar to share one with you, because most of the time people are going to be happy to kind of share what their process is. So, try to figure out what that template looks like, but then with more and more experience, you're able to more quickly kind of identify where those issues are. So I think that flexibility is a real value add once you've got the years of experience under your belt.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, some of these questionnaires can be really extensive. And so a lot of my initial questions to clients sort of just take out some of the main points of this, some of the questionnaires, I guess. And for example, like if we get to, we're talking about, you blew, what did you eat? Do you have any medical problems? Just generally brief, you can go into more detail. Do you have any eye issues? Have you had glaucoma? Have you had, cataracts? Have you had any kind of surgery on your eyes? And then, liver issues, those kind of things. Just briefly touching on some of those things, and we can go back in more detail. And I think some of the questionnaires cover some of those things. But like I said, instead of spending hours or just having someone take their time and fill out a questionnaire initially, I'd rather just talk to them a little bit casually.
Yes. Yeah.
And get them comfortable with just talking to me, because no matter if it's a speeding ticket or a DWI or serious felony, most people, by the time they get to us as defense lawyers, they're usually in a pretty bad spot.
Yeah.
And they don't come to, and because we deal with people's lives. And so there are a lot of times they're very nervous and very upset and scared to death. And that's why I just like to just talk to them generally and not really sort of use a sterile application with no emotion. And because a lot of times they're looking for hope and a little bit of comfort. And I'm not a counselor or anything as far as a therapist, but also want to say, hey, most of the cases that I have, there's a lot of optimism to be had somewhere. There's some guys that are looking at some bad stuff. Yeah. Especially in the homicide cases we do or sex offense cases, but the other, vast majority, there's optimism to be there. And I try to be as optimistic as possible. But that's why I like to just have a little conversation, just me and them talking, so they can feel a little comfortable, maybe start gaining a little trust. Hey, I can trust this attorney. He has my best interests. But I make it clear, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think, whether, and sometimes those are things you don't want to hear. And
I think that trust factor is so critical. And I think trying to establish that rapport early on in the consultation is, just critical, not only to, just getting on the same page and being able to communicate well, but even encouraging the client to divulge as much information as possible, because that's really where that comfort of being able to share what probably was a pretty traumatic experience. Maybe outside of a speeding ticket, but for some people, a speeding ticket is still like a life-changing event. And so you're able to use that moment to be able to say, hey, it's going to be okay.
And with some clients, sometimes I wanted I want to know a lot of specific things, more details. Some clients, depends on the case. I may not ask all that right up front and have them, say everything. Sometimes I just want to ask some questions and not say, not get their side of the story necessarily. A lot of times I may say, oh, what did you make any statements to law enforcement? Instead of saying, hey, what happened? I say, well, did you give any statements to law enforcement? Well, tell me what you told law enforcement. And if they didn't give any statements to law enforcement, like a DWI, sometimes I may ask, well, tell me what happened, or did you drink, or those kind of. Sometimes I may not ask that initially. It really just depends on the case.
Yeah, I think that's important. That's not something that I would say that I have done regularly, in terms of just trying to kind of get that initial connection of, hey, let's just talk for a few moments. It's kind of almost more on my front, like straight into sometimes the meat of the issue, or explaining what the consultation is going to look like. But I really do think that banter, because there have been times when I've gone that route a little bit more, that kind of initial back and forth really shows a lot in a very short period of time to the client, that, hey, I can just trust this person to let this go. And that's, I mean, obviously that's very important on every case, whether it's a murder or a DWI, because,
Sure.
Client is trying to really kind of assess before they've hired you, whether or not you're going to be a good fit.
Sure. And that's all. I also ask them, usually, well, how did you hear about me?
Yeah.
Like, well, I got a referral from a friend or a family member that I've represented before. And so if it's, if I've represented a friend or a family, sometimes the person comes in, I guess, with a little bit more trust.
Yes.
Or
Definitely.
if the versus, well, I found you on the internet. Well, okay. We have a lot of Google reviews like yourself. And so a lot of people, that's the word of mouth these days.
Yeah.
Google reviews on the internet. So some people, do a lot of research and look at Google reviews. And then, I talked to them about my experience and the fact that, of course, no lawyer can ever promise or guarantee a result. We talk about the experience and the thousands of people that we've represented, but, we take it serious. And I always say, look, you're not going to hurt my feelings. The main thing in choosing a lawyer, you got to feel comfortable with that lawyer. And because
absolutely,
we probably all think we're the best. We have good egos. But like I said, I can't promise I can do a better job than someone fresh out of law school. But that's why we talk, just so they can have some comfort, so they can make a reasoned and informed decision, whether I'm a good fit for them in this particular case, or they feel like, well, no, I'm going to go with somebody else.
Yeah, no, and I think that is something that you become more comfortable with as the years go by. I think in practice is understanding that just because somebody doesn't hire you, don't take that as like a slap in the face. Maybe you're not a good fit. And I also think the reverse is true, that early on in practice, you're desperate to take anything that walks in the door, any person that walks in the door, no matter what the issue, what the case. Hey, I'm your guy. Like this, I'm totally equipped to do this.
That's right. Especially when you have 4 kids getting ready.
Yeah, that's right. Good motivation to take a case. But I think that it kind of works both ways. And I think that the earlier on you can recognize that there is really something special about the attorney-client relationship. And, if you're not a good fit for the client, or the client's not going to be a good fit for you, it will be miserable. And I've had it kind of work both ways. I've had clients that I feel like, probably I'm not the right fit for this person. And I recognize that now. Or the flip side, after a while, you're kind of, you're all about getting that case. And then, 10 minutes in, you're like, that was probably a bad call on that front, So I think it really is important to kind of recognize and not take personal the fact that not every client's going to be the right fit.
Yeah. Well, and really depends. It's just each person has a different personality. There's going to be some clients that come in and, you put a fee, they hire you, and you won't hear from them. They won't call. They let you do your thing. And which is, and I call them, I talk to them. They're like, okay, we'll do that. Or if you tribal issue. Okay, I trust you. And there's some clients that call, multiple times a day, every day.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but then there's just the higher anxiety
Yes.
in people that. So I try to put myself in their shoes too.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're calling, and it might sometimes, get a little, on our part, a little stressful that we have to deal with someone calling constantly and answering questions. But I also try to put myself in that position, like, okay, if I'm facing this situation, I'm going to be nervous too.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it was my family member, I'd want to make sure that they get taken care of also. So, and one of the biggest complaints, if not the biggest complaints lawyers have, is not returning phone calls and not being. So, I tell clients, hey, my general philosophy is I try to return calls within 24 to 48 hours. If I'm stuck, in a trial or something, sometimes that may not happen. But I really make that concerted effort, and if I can, then I get my staff to get as much information to relay to me, so I can maybe at least send them an email or a message or something. Because I want to have that communication, and it's easy because if a client doesn't contact you that much, it's easy just to talk to them in the initial consultation, and you maybe see them again in court, and you see them once or twice. Assume, hey, they're okay because they haven't called them. And sometimes they don't have a clue what's going on, but you just assume they're fine because they haven't called you. So a lot of our letters put in there, like, if you ever have any questions, please call me, because I'm not going to know much to ask. And I don't want, and I tell people that a lot of times in person or on the phone, hey, lawyers may think that you're just fine if you don't have any questions or don't call us, because we're just going to assume you're just fine. You may be torn up inside. And just might be their personality where they're too scared to call and ask, hey, what's going on with my case? And that's why I want to ease their mind also about, hey, never hesitate to call if you have any questions. I may not be able to answer the question, but don't hesitate.
Yeah, I think that is so important. I think laying down what the client communication looks like early on, probably during that first consultation is how we do it. This is what our communication is going to look like back and forth. And then when somebody gets us involved, we'll send them kind of our, kind of communication policy so that they are kind of aware of, hey, here's like how the communication is going to, go back and forth. Because if you don't set that from the get-go, then in this world of kind of instant access where everything is just kind of at the fingertips and at the ready, if you haven't called back in 5 minutes, you may really be kind of like already on this person's bad side, by the time that if you haven't returned 3 calls in a row, you're going to be making anybody mad. But if you kind of talk through, hey, here's maybe the times that I'm available for phone calls every week. Here's the person that you need to contact at the office so that we can make sure that we're getting your questions answered. The more that you can be upfront about that, I think the better off you are. I mean, it's a huge issue. I mean, good communication is really important.
Absolutely. And like yourself, like we have a couple hundred Google reviews, and there's maybe a couple of negative ones. And there's one particular that a guy left that says that we never called him back. He wasn't a client. I never met him. And once I saw that, I asked my assistant, I don't recall, getting this message. Well, she said, I called him back a couple times and left a message and never heard back from him. And so, it's just sometimes it's so impatient.
Yeah.
You don't call them back immediately.
Yeah.
It's going to end up, hey, bad Google review.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, I mean, and that's the least of your worries, because it's like you said, there are complaints, but even just trying to kind of then do damage control on an unhappy client, you're talking about spending probably hours of your time trying to kind of tool that relationship and kind of recoup the lost trust in just not returning the phone call. It's a lot more expensive long-term than just having a good communication policy.
Well, we had a sort of a high anxiety client yesterday in court, and I talked to her a good bit on the phone. She would, some people don't think I should give it my cell phone, but I give my cell phone out to a lot of clients. And I'm like, look, if it's an emergency, call me on my cell. Or if you can call me on my cell during this time. But if it's a general question, try to call the office first. I'm generally in court, yada, yada, yada. But sometimes people abuse that, of course, and call at all hours of the night. And this person particularly was very nervous and just needed her hand held, which, is understandable. And then we get in court and we have a trial. And then where they finally, sometimes it just takes this, they see you in action.
Yeah.
And, and this happened yesterday where I was cross-examining the person that was making this complaint against her, accusing her of these things. And, she really appreciated the I guess, how zealous I was in cross-examining, and we ended up being successful in the case. And, people like that, like, oh, this made me feel so good. And
yeah,
sometimes it takes, going to court and seeing your lawyer in action for them to say, okay, he is fighting for me. Yeah.
Right.
Let's trust. And a lot of times they don't see that till you're in court.
Yeah. And I think that is, again, something that you kind of, from the client's angle, get to experience after the fact, because leading up to that build up to trial, it's just, I'm calling the office and they're telling me this guy's in court. I'm calling the office and he's working on a brief or doing something. And so finally you get your turn in court and it's like, oh, okay, well there's people calling the office right now. And I know that there's not that like intentional thought process probably by most people, but I do think that once you've actually then lived it yourself in the courtroom, or even just going to court several times and kind of seeing the dysfunction that is going on in the courtroom and how slow things progress and the way that calendar is called, I think that is really actually helpful to clients, kind of in this world of immediate response, to get to experience that themselves, because then it really does. It's kind of like for, as you were saying earlier, putting yourself in the client's shoes and trying to imagine what they're dealing with and the anxiety that this is causing, and live that yourself. What's the reverse of that? Now they're getting to kind of see, okay, well, things aren't quite as efficient as I might have pictured them, or aren't quite as kind of streamlined as I would have pictured them. So it's helpful. Maybe just not even as dramatic or scary as I would have pictured them. So I feel like that really does help kind of showcase, okay, this guy is doing what I was expecting.
Yeah, and with DWI specifically, a lot of people, especially if it's a first offense, maybe not a real aggravated case, a lot of times there's not going to be jail time involved, but people still have a lot of high anxiety because they're concerned about, when I explain to them, well, DWI will be on your record forever.
Right.
You can't expunge it. Like, oh, well, I thought it fell off after 7 years. And you have to explain, no, it doesn't. I mean, it might not count as a, grossly aggravating factor after 7 years, but you have to explain it's going to be part of your criminal record. Oh, gosh, it's going to go with me forever. And so that is a stressful point. And then, of course, one of the biggest things, if a conviction occurs, is the license. And, I had a young boy in my office the other day who was under 21. And looking at the DWI, and I had to explain to him, well, if you're convicted, I can't get you limited privilege. You can't drive.
Yep.
Because you're under 21. I spoke to you about that case. You and I spoke about that because I was wanting to confirm that the revocation is going to be for 1 year, which I believe it is, but still, the kid's upset because he's a teenager and he's just turned 18. And I mean, kids love to drive, and take away is a huge consequence.
It's a huge consequence, yeah.
Yeah, and I have a teenage daughter that I explained to her, say, look, if you run a stop sign, if you get caught high speeding, God forbid you have any alcohol in your system, and you get caught, your license is gone.
Yes.
Yeah. I
think that's a great benefit of being a DWI lawyer. If you have kids, knowing what these consequences are. I don't give the individual, I don't reveal confidential information at the house, but I certainly regularly talk about, hey, here's what happened in court today. Let me tell you what the consequences were, because I do think that there's a fair amount of just lack of knowledge for whatever reason on that front in public. I mean, even when it comes to the .08 law itself of nobody has a clue when they hit .08, especially not somebody that's 18 years old. So.
Well, in these days with all the different kinds of alcohol and the high gravity beers and this and that kind of beer and hard ciders, people can have one drink, and there's the thing on the internet, of course, and generally people want to think, well, I drink one drink, my blood alcohol is going to go up to about a 0.02 for every drink, and then so I can have 4 or 5 drinks and then wait a while, and then for every hour that takes off like a drink that I've had. All these misnomers that you hear people say. But with all these different, high alcohol concentration drinks, people can have 1 or 2 and just be way out, way above the legal limit and not realize it. And so I'm sure, like you, I've had so many people come in and say, I wasn't drunk. I mean, I felt okay. I wasn't impaired. And I'm like, have to explain to them, well, in North Carolina, you don't have to be. If you have, they can have a right to stop you, or a good, probable cause to arrest you, and you blow the legal limit or over, and they can prove that. Doesn't matter. You don't have to be impaired. You don't have to feel drunk. That's just that's the 0.08 standard. Now, if they don't have that, of course, then they can still try to get you because of appreciable impairment. We have those conversations too. There's a lot of people that there's no way I got my blood taken. There's no way I can be over the legal limit. And, it's a rare occasion that the blood does come back, under the legal limit. And we've had occasion where it's been very questionable, like a 0.08. So we've often got orders, season the blood and get it independently tested. And I've had a couple of occasions where the independent test comes below the 0.08, barely, but it still comes below it. So we can argue that, but people are sometimes shocked about what their blood alcohol is once they get the results.
Yeah, no, I think that's a common concern from clients is just the blood alcohol, what's it going to come back at? Why is it taking so long for the SBI to come back? And so again, I think just recognizing those repeat problem points is so important for kind of improving your practice, because something as simple as, well, hey, if we're going to try to get a good estimate of what maybe your BAC was, let's take a look at what the hospital record was, or let's take a look at what the PBT is that's on the driving while impaired report, because that maybe will give us a clue as to kind of what to expect when we get the lab result back. But even just kind of explaining, small things like early on in the case, it could be over a year before we get the blood result back, depending on if it's alcohol or drugs, or if they're going to retest it. So, all of these things kind of, are really important to kind of get into the client's wheelhouse as soon as you can, because again, that just helps to set those expectations right from the get-go. In terms of the district court practice, with DWI cases, what is your process for kind of preparing for a DWI in district court?
Yeah, so the first step is like I said, I talk to the client and get a general overview about what's going on. Was there a wreck? Am I looking at probably a high alcohol concentration, a questionable concentration? Am I looking at aggravating factors? And then I guess these days it's a little easier with the discovery process, especially one of the former chief assistants put in place where they'll hand over the driving while impaired report forms ahead of time. And so we always request that with every single case, whether I think this is going to be a trial or not. We always request the driving while impaired report form. I find out if this is, of course, APD or the Buncombe County Sheriff. And if so, of course, we request the body camera. If it's state trooper, then we try to see, well, okay, can we see if there's dash cam video? and also for APD and sheriffs too, but a lot of times they don't have that for a variety of reasons. So we see, so we just see what evidence there is, what we might need to do, but always the DWI form, always the citations, always the civil revocation file. I want to look at the officer's affidavit, of course, the chemical analyst affidavit, the intoximeter report, the printout from the intoximeter, and we look at all that. That's where we generally start in district court, and then a lot of times, of course, we'll talk to the officer, and but based on those reports and talking to the client, then I can sort of establish, okay, this is where we need to go. As far as, am I looking at fighting probable cause? Am I looking at this being a trial? Was it a wreck? For example, we have a lot of wrecks. And so a lot of the first questions we asked people was, well, were you in the car or were you out of the car by the time the officers showed up? And a lot of times, well, I was out of the car. Would you recall, did they ask you if you were driving, or did you admit to driving, or were there multiple people in the car? Or, because these days, can the law enforcement establish that they were driving the car? And at the time of driving, were they impaired? So, a lot of times these officers, especially seasoned officers, and sometimes lawyers make them seasoned officers because you beat them in trial.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, and I've had several officers like that, where one particular years ago, as a trooper, where my client wrecked. He sort of follows this trail of liquid or something back to her house. She answers the door, and he sees this half bottle of vodka in her house, and he arrests her, gets her to say, yeah, I was driving, but he never asked her about when she consumed that alcohol. So at trial, of course, I cross-examined him, like, well, did she say when she consumed the alcohol? No. Well, you said you saw this half bottle of vodka at her house. Did you ask her if she had some while she was there at the house before you got there? No, I didn't. So they can't establish, that she was appreciably impaired, while driving or before the driving, and not after. So that's. But of course, you educate that officer, and he told me for years that now, every time there's a wreck case, he asks, did you consume any alcohol after the wreck? And that's part of one of the questions on the alcohol report form that they generally have. Those are things you want to establish. What can the officer and what can the state prove?
And as you're kind of going through that discovery process and getting that information in, what does it look like in terms of your review of that information with your client?
So some clients want to see everything that we have. And I say, well, look, you're entitled to everything, all the reports, body cameras, and a lot of clients want to do that. So, we make copies of the reports, and, we can send that to them. I explain to them, well, we can't give you copies of the body camera and the videos just for, statutory and discovery reasons, discovery agreement reasons, but we can give you copies of the other reports and stuff. And so some clients are very interested in that. Some clients just say, what do you think?
Right. If you found the information in this podcast to be valuable, I simply ask that you pay it forward and share this podcast with another member of the legal community. Also, if you would leave us a rating or a review on whatever platform you are listening on, I would greatly appreciate it.